He canceled our wedding in front of everyone to crush me, announcing to 200 guests that he deserved better, while his ex-girlfriend walked in wearing white and sat in the front row smiling. I'm Rebecca Ashford, 29 years old, and 3 hours ago I was supposed to become Mrs. Fletcher. Instead, I watched my fiancé humiliate me at the altar, while cameras captured every second for our expensive wedding video package. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel had been transformed into my dream wedding venue. Ivory drapes cascading from 20-foot ceilings, thousands of white roses arranged in crystal vases, and a string quartet playing softly as guests settled into their seats. I stood at the end of the aisle in my custom gown, my father's arm linked through mine, when Connor stepped forward with a microphone. His perfectly styled blonde hair caught the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. That smile I'd trusted for 3 years spread across his face, but something in his eyes made my stomach drop. The music stopped. Every head turned. Connor cleared his throat like he was about to give a toast, and my bridesmaids exchanged confused glances behind me. Before we begin, Connor's voice echoed through the ballroom. I need to be honest with everyone here. He paused, seeming to savor the moment. Rebecca is a wonderful woman. She's kind, she's loyal, she's been supportive through everything. Another pause. But I deserve better. The words hung in the air like poison. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father's arm tightened around mine. I felt my carefully applied makeup threatening to run as tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced them back. Connor wasn't finished. I've spent 3 years trying to make this work, trying to convince myself that settling was enough. But then Madison reminded me what real passion feels like. He gestured toward the back of the ballroom. Come on up here, babe. The double doors opened, and Madison Sterling walked through them wearing a white designer dress that probably cost more than my entire wedding. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, and she carried a bouquet of red roses. She didn't walk down the aisle. She glided, making direct eye contact with me the entire way. When she reached the front, she took the seat that had been reserved for Connor's grandmother, crossing her legs and smiling like she'd just won a prize. 200 people sat in stunned silence. My mother stood up from her seat, her face pale. My best friend Lauren started to move toward me, but I held up one hand to stop her, because despite the humiliation burning through my veins, despite the sick satisfaction on Connor's face as he watched me process his betrayal, I was thinking about something else entirely. I was thinking about the folder in my bridal suite upstairs, the one Connor didn't know about, the one I'd assembled over the past 6 weeks after my gut instinct finally overrode my desperate need to believe in him. Connor had been so careful, or so he thought. The late nights at the office, the password-protected phone, the sudden interest in going to the gym 5 times a week. Madison had been his business associate, someone he occasionally mentioned in passing, always with just enough casualness to seem innocent. She ran a boutique marketing firm. They'd met at a conference. Sometimes they had to work closely on client presentations. Nothing to worry about, he'd assured me every time I asked. What Connor didn't know was that I'd hired a private investigator 2 months ago. What he didn't know was that I'd discovered he and Madison had been sleeping together for 8 months. What he didn't know was that Connor had been systematically draining our joint accounts to fund lavish gifts for her, including the very dress she was wearing right now. And what he really didn't know was that 3 weeks ago, I'd filed a civil lawsuit against both of them for fraud and breach of contract regarding the wedding expenses they'd been secretly planning to skip out on. My father started to move, his face red with rage, but I touched his arm gently and shook my head. Instead, I handed my bouquet to Lauren, hiked up my dress slightly, and walked down the aisle with perfect posture, not away from Connor, toward him. You're absolutely right, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. My voice didn't shake. You do deserve better, and Madison is exactly what you deserve. Connor's confident smirk faltered for just a second. Madison's smile tightened. Neither of them expected me to agree with them. I reached into the small pocket I'd had sewn into my dress, carefully concealed beneath layers of tulle and lace, and pulled out a sealed envelope. I actually have a wedding gift for both of you, I said, extending it to Connor. You should open it now. I think everyone here would love to see it. Connor took the envelope, his expression shifting from confusion to wariness. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the paper tearing. He pulled out the contents, and I watched the color drain from his face as he read the first page. Behind him, Madison stood up from her seat, her perfect composure cracking. What is that? She demanded, her voice sharp. Legal documents, I said pleasantly, turning to address the crowd. See, Connor and Madison have been planning this little scene for weeks. They thought it would be funny to humiliate me publicly, to turn our wedding into their coming out party. I smiled, and it felt dangerous. What they didn't plan on was getting served with a lawsuit for the $47 they stole from our joint accounts to fund their affair, or the fraud charges for the fake invoices Connor submitted to my father's company, or the breach of contract suit from the wedding vendors they promised to pay and then ghosted. Connor's hand holding the papers began to tremble. Madison stumbled backward, her designer heel catching on the chair. Around us, wedding guests were pulling out their phones, some recording, some frantically texting. This was going to be all over social media within minutes. But wait, I continued, my voice sweet as honey laced with poison. There's more. Connor's been telling Madison that I'm the one with money problems, that my family is on the verge of bankruptcy, that once we were married, he'd have access to my trust fund and could finally leave me for her. I turned back to him, watching his face cycle through denial, panic, and rage. Spoiler alert, there is no trust fund. Never was. Every dollar I have, I earned myself working 80-hour weeks at my architecture firm. The money you've been stealing, that was my savings for our future. The accounts you emptied, those were supposed to fund our honeymoon and down payment on a house. Madison's face had gone from confident to calculating to absolutely pale. She grabbed Connor's arm. You said she had family money. You said he lied, I interrupted, to both of us. But here's the beautiful part, Madison. All those gifts he bought you, paid for with my money, that dress you're wearing right now, I technically own it. The apartment he promised to get you, funded by fraud he committed against my father's company. Congratulations, you're officially an accessory. The ballroom erupted. Voices overlapped, some shouting questions, others offering support, many simply trying to process what they were witnessing. Connor tried to speak, opening and closing his mouth like a fish, but no words came out. Madison pushed past him, heading for the doors, but two men in suits stepped into the aisle, blocking her path. Oh, did I mention? I said, raising my voice above the chaos. Those are process servers. You're both being served right now, in front of everyone. Seemed appropriate given the circumstances. One of the servers handed papers to a frozen Madison while the other passed a second set to Connor. My former fiancé's face had gone from pale to red, veins standing out on his neck. He crumpled the papers in his fist and took a step toward me, his hand raised. My father moved faster than I'd ever seen him move, intercepting Connor with one hand on his chest. Touch her, and I'll have you arrested for assault on top of everything else, he said, his voice deadly calm. Behind him, three of my male cousins stood from their seats, forming an impromptu barrier. Security guards, already alerted by the commotion, arrived at the ballroom entrance. Connor looked around wildly, finally seeming to realize that his grand gesture had backfired spectacularly. Madison was crying now, mascara running down her carefully made-up face. Not elegant tears, but ugly sobs of panic. I turned to address the guests one final time. Thank you all for coming today. I know this isn't the wedding you expected, but I hope you found it memorable. There's a reception dinner already paid for downstairs. Please enjoy it on me. Consider it a celebration of me dodging the biggest bullet of my life. I paused, looking directly at Connor and Madison. These two, however, are not invited. In fact, they need to leave immediately before the police arrive to discuss those fraud charges. The ballroom erupted again, but this time with applause. My mother was crying, but she was smiling through her tears. Lauren pushed through the crowd and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. My father kept his position between me and Connor, watching as security escorted both Connor and Madison toward the exit. As they were led away, Connor finally found his voice. You vindictive witch. You planned this. I protected myself, I called after him. There's a difference. Enjoy bankruptcy court next month. I hear it's lovely this time of year. The doors closed behind them, and the string quartet, bless them, started playing again. Someone laughed, then someone else, and soon the whole ballroom was buzzing with energy. My wedding planner appeared at my elbow, looking shell-shocked but determined. Miss Ashford, she said. Should I cancel the photographer and videographer? I looked at the cameras that had captured everything, thought about the footage they now had, and smiled. Absolutely not. I want every second documented. This is my wedding day, just not the wedding I planned. I turned to Lauren. Go tell everyone to head downstairs. We're having a party. As guests filed out, many stopping to hug me or share words of support, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the ballroom's massive mirrors. My dress was perfect, my hair still elegantly styled, my makeup barely smudged despite everything. I looked like a bride, but more importantly, I looked like someone who had just won a war she'd been fighting in secret for weeks. What Connor and Madison didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I hadn't just discovered their affair 6 weeks ago. I'd known for almost 3 months. I'd had time to plan, to document, to build an airtight case with my attorney. I'd continued to play the excited bride, choosing flowers and tasting cakes and sending out invitations, all while my private investigator gathered evidence and my lawyer prepared the nuclear option. Because I'd learned something important about myself during those months of pretending. I wasn't just kind and loyal like Connor had said. I was strategic. I was patient. And when someone tried to destroy me, I made sure they destroyed themselves instead. Downstairs in the reception hall, the party that was supposed to celebrate my marriage to Connor transformed into something else entirely. A celebration of survival. A testament to the fact that sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even. It's making sure everyone witnesses exactly who the real villain is. My phone buzzed in Lauren's purse. Text messages were flooding in from people who'd already posted about the wedding disaster on social media. Connor's name was trending on Twitter. Madison's boutique firm's reviews were being bombed by strangers who'd seen the videos. The public humiliation they'd tried to orchestrate for me had boomeranged back with twice the force. And this was only the beginning. The reception hall buzzed with an energy I'd never anticipated. Guests clustered around cocktail tables, phones out, sharing videos and commenting in real time as my disaster wedding went viral. I stood near the entrance watching 200 people transform from shocked witnesses into something resembling a support army. My phone hadn't stopped vibrating. Messages from college friends who'd seen the videos, calls from distant relatives checking if I was okay, even former colleagues from my architecture firm reaching out with offers of legal support or character references. Connor's public humiliation of me had backfired so spectacularly that I almost felt dizzy from the reversal. Rebecca. My mother appeared beside me, champagne flute in hand. Her eyes were red, but fierce. I just got off the phone with your Aunt Patricia. She's a family law attorney, remember? She says what Connor did today actually strengthens your fraud case considerably. Public admission of the affair, witnesses to his intentional infliction of emotional distress. I accepted the champagne she handed me. Good. I want him buried. My mother's eyebrows rose slightly. She'd never heard that tone from me before. 3 years with Connor had trained me to be soft, accommodating, understanding. The woman standing in this reception hall wasn't that person anymore. Lauren materialized with my cousin James, who worked in cybersecurity. You need to see this, James said, pulling up his laptop. Connor's LinkedIn is getting destroyed. Someone found his profile and started posting links to news articles about the wedding. His company's been tagged in about 50 posts in the last hour. I leaned over to read the screen. Connor worked as a senior account manager at Silverstone Financial, a mid-sized investment firm that prided itself on trustworthiness and family values. Their corporate social media accounts were being flooded with questions about whether they endorsed employees who committed fraud and publicly humiliated their partners. His boss called me, my father said, joining our small circle. His face was grim but satisfied. Gerald Hoffman, we golf together occasionally. He wanted to personally apologize and assure me that Connor's employment is being reviewed. Apparently, several clients have already called threatening to pull their accounts if the company doesn't take action. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd anticipated. I'd planned for legal consequences, for financial penalties, for the satisfaction of watching Connor face accountability in court. What I hadn't planned for was the court of public opinion moving this swiftly, this decisively. There's more, James said, clicking to another tab. Madison's boutique firm, their website crashed an hour ago from traffic. And look at this. He pulled up their Instagram account. The comments section under their most recent post was a wasteland of accusations, people canceling contracts, former clients sharing their own stories about unprofessional behavior. Madison had built her business on being aspirational, on presenting herself as the perfect blend of beauty, brains, and business savvy. That image was currently being incinerated across every social platform simultaneously. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me accept the call. Rebecca Ashford, a woman's voice, professional and crisp, speaking. This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're covering the story about your wedding today, and would love to get your statement for our evening broadcast. I glanced at my family. I'll need to consult with my attorney and get back to you. 3 more calls came in before I could put the phone down. A local morning show, a podcast that focused on relationship red flags, even a producer from a national talk show that specialized in viral moments. This is insane, Lauren breathed. You're everywhere. There are already memes. She showed me her phone. Someone had screenshot the moment I handed Connor the envelope, captioning it, "When you bring receipts to your own wedding." Another showed Madison's face as she realized she was being served, captioned, "That moment when your side piece status gets upgraded to defendant." The memes should have bothered me. They were reducing the worst day of my life to entertainment. But instead, I felt something unexpected. Power. Every share, every comment, every news outlet picking up the story meant Connor and Madison couldn't hide from what they'd done. There would be no spinning this as a mutual breakup, no rewriting history to make them the victims. My attorney, Patricia Chen, arrived at the reception within the hour. She'd been on standby in case Connor tried anything violent, but now she looked almost gleeful as she pulled me into a private corner. "I've been practicing law for 23 years, she said, and I've never seen self-destruction happen this fast. Connor's attorney called me 30 minutes ago trying to negotiate. They want to settle before this goes to court." "Absolutely not," I said immediately. "I want a trial. I want everything documented in public record." Patricia's smile was sharp. "I was hoping you'd say that. Because here's what we have now that we didn't have this morning. Video evidence of Connor admitting he was in a relationship with Madison while engaged to you. Witness testimony from 200 people who heard him confess to wasting 3 years of your life while planning to leave you all along. And most importantly, His own words about deserving better, which any jury will interpret as premeditated emotional cruelty. What about the fraud charges against my father's company? That case just got exponentially stronger. Connor submitted falsified expense reports for business dinners and client entertainment that never happened. Your father has the documentation, but now we also have motive. Connor was stealing from the company to fund his affair. The prosecution will love this. It's straightforward, it's clear-cut, and thanks to today's circus, there's not a jury pool in this city that won't have heard about it. I sipped my champagne, letting the information settle. What's the realistic outcome? For the civil suit, full restitution of the $47,000, plus damages for emotional distress. Given the public nature of the humiliation and the documentation we have, I'd estimate another $100,000 to $150,000 in punitive damages. For the fraud charges against your father's company, that's criminal. Connor could be looking at 3 to 5 years. 3 to 5 years. The number hung in the air between us. And Madison? I asked. Trickier. She received stolen funds but can claim she didn't know the source. However, her participation today, showing up in that dress, sitting in the front row, that demonstrates knowledge and intent to cause you harm. We can make her life very expensive, even if criminal charges don't stick. My father found us 20 minutes later. Rebecca, there's someone here who needs to speak with you. He's insistent. I followed him to a quiet hallway where a man in his 50s waited. Expensive suit, tired eyes. Miss Ashford, I'm Gerald Hoffman, Connor's boss at Silverstone Financial. I know who you are. My voice was flat. I want to apologize personally for what happened today. I've known Connor for 6 years. I had no idea he was capable of something like this. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I also want you to know that, effective immediately, Connor's employment has been terminated. We've launched an internal investigation into his expense reports and client accounts. If we find evidence of fraud against our company, we'll be pressing charges independently. You should check his corporate card statements from the past 8 months, I said. I have documentation that might interest you. Charges at jewelry stores, high-end restaurants, boutique hotels, all on dates when he claimed to be at client meetings. Gerald's jaw tightened. Would you be willing to share that documentation? My attorney will send it over Monday morning. Consider it a gift. After he left, I returned to the reception to find the party had taken on a life of its own. Someone had changed the playlist from classical wedding music to upbeat pop anthems. My bridesmaids had formed a protective circle around me, intercepting anyone who approached with inappropriate questions or morbid curiosity. The evening wore on. Dinner was served, the food I'd spent months selecting, now being consumed in celebration of my escape rather than my marriage. Several guests gave impromptu toasts, my uncle declaring that I'd shown more strength in one afternoon than most people managed in a lifetime. My best friend from childhood shared a story about how I'd always been the one who stood up to bullies on the playground. By 10 o'clock, I was exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the raw edges of betrayal and heartbreak. Lauren noticed immediately, pulling me aside. Let's get you out of here. You've done enough for one day. We slipped out a side entrance. The hotel had arranged for my bridal suite to remain available, a small mercy in the chaos. Lauren helped me out of my dress, carefully hanging it in the closet while I changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt. I can't believe you knew for 3 months and never said anything, she said quietly. I couldn't risk him finding out. If Connor had known I was gathering evidence, he might have cleaned out the rest of the accounts or destroyed documentation. I needed him to feel safe, to think he was getting away with it. That must have been hell. Pretending everything was fine while planning your wedding to someone who was cheating on you. I sat on the edge of the massive hotel bed, the same bed where I was supposed to spend my wedding night with Connor. The worst part was how good he was at lying. Even knowing what I knew, there were moments when he'd kiss me or tell me he loved me, and I'd think maybe the investigator was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation, but there wasn't. No, there never is. My phone lit up with another notification, a text from a number I didn't recognize. You're a vindictive bitch and you'll regret this. We'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. I showed Lauren. She frowned. That's from Madison. Want me to forward it to your attorney? Yes, and save it. That's harassment and possibly threatening. Add it to the file. More texts came in over the next hour, some from Connor's friends defending him, calling me manipulative for entrapping him at the altar. Others from people I'd never met, strangers who'd seen the videos and wanted to share their own stories of betrayal and survival. The wedding planner sent an itemized list of expenses, including the charges Connor had promised to pay but never did. The photographer sent a Dropbox link to the day's photos, hundreds of images documenting my public humiliation in high definition. I opened the folder reluctantly. There was the moment Connor took the microphone, confidence radiating from every pixel. The photo of Madison walking down the aisle in her white dress, her smile predatory and triumphant. The exact second I'd handed Connor the envelope, his face still smug before he'd read the contents. And then the transformation, the shock, the panic, the rage. The photographer had caught it all. These are going to be evidence, Lauren said, looking over my shoulder. Every single one. Around midnight, my mother called. "Sweetheart, you should know that Connor's mother reached out. She's devastated. She said she had no idea what he was planning and wants to apologize. Does she want to testify on my behalf?" A pause. She didn't mention that specifically. "Then I don't want to hear from her. Her son committed fraud, theft, and public humiliation. If she's truly sorry, she can say so under oath." My mother's voice softened. "You've changed today. I can hear it. I had to. The old Rebecca would have forgiven him, would have tried to understand his perspective, would have blamed herself for not being enough. That person almost married a thief and a liar. I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "Your father and I both are. We should have seen what Connor was doing. We should have protected you better. You couldn't have known. He was careful. I only found out because I got paranoid and hired an investigator. If I'd waited another month, I'd be married to him right now, legally entangled with someone who was systematically destroying me." After we hung up, I lay in the dark hotel room, still in my sweatpants, listening to the distant sounds of the city below. My phone continued to buzz with notifications, a constant reminder that my private pain had become public spectacle. Tomorrow, the story would be in newspapers. Next week, probably national outlets. My name, my face, forever linked to the woman who got dumped at her own wedding. Except that wasn't the full story. And as exhaustion finally pulled me toward sleep, I thought about the moment Connor's face had changed when he opened that envelope. The shock, the disbelief, the dawning horror as he realized he hadn't humiliated me. He'd humiliated himself. That image would carry me through whatever came next. Monday morning arrived with surgical precision. I woke in my childhood bedroom where I'd moved temporarily after leaving the hotel. My phone already flooded with morning show clips and news articles. "Bride gets ultimate revenge," read one headline. "Wedding disaster goes viral as groom gets served," proclaimed another. Patricia called at 8 sharp. "We need to meet. Connor's attorney is scrambling. He's filed 3 motions this morning trying to suppress the wedding video footage. On what grounds? He's claiming you orchestrated the entire scene specifically to damage Connor's reputation and career, that you intentionally created a public spectacle for the purpose of legal advantage." I smiled grimly. "Good. Let him make that argument in court. It'll sound great to a jury. A man who stole $47 and publicly humiliated his fiancée is the real victim, because she had the audacity to defend herself with documentation." That's exactly what I told his attorney. The judge denied all 3 motions within an hour. We're moving forward. I spent the morning at Patricia's office, reviewing documents and preparing for depositions. The file on Connor had grown thick with evidence. Bank statements showing the transfers, receipts for gifts purchased for Madison, text message records between Connor and Madison that I'd subpoenaed through the court, hotel records, restaurant reservations, everything that proved the affair had been ongoing and expensive. "We also have something interesting from Silverstone Financial," Patricia said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Connor's employer did their own investigation. They found $73,000 in fraudulent expense claims over the past 2 years. He was running a parallel scheme at work while stealing from you and your father's company." The number staggered me. "He stole over $120,000 total. At minimum, we're still uncovering accounts. Your investigator found evidence of a credit card in Connor's name that you never knew about. It's maxed out at $35,000. All charges for luxury items and travel. Guess who was the authorized user? Madison. Correct. Which means she wasn't just the recipient of stolen funds, she was actively participating in the theft. That changes her legal exposure significantly." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You're destroying people's lives over a breakup. Connor made a mistake, but he doesn't deserve this. You need to drop the charges." I showed Patricia. She grimaced. "That's the 4th harassment message this week. We're documenting all of them. I've already filed for a restraining order against both Connor and Madison. The hearing is Wednesday. Will it be granted?" Given the threatening nature of some messages and Connor's violent reaction at the wedding when he raised his hand to you, absolutely. The judge will want to prevent any escalation. That afternoon, I returned to work for the first time since the wedding. My architecture firm occupied 3 floors of a downtown building, all glass and steel and modern design. Walking through the lobby felt surreal. Everyone knew what had happened. The videos had been shared in company chat groups. My inbox contained dozens of supportive emails from colleagues. My boss, Catherine Morrison, called me into her office immediately. "Rebecca, how are you holding up?" "I'm managing." She studied me carefully. Catherine was 60. Formidable, and had built her career in an era when women in architecture were systematically excluded from major projects. She didn't tolerate weakness, but she respected strategic thinking. "What you did took extraordinary courage," she said finally, "and extraordinary planning. How long did you know?" 3 months. Her eyebrows rose. "You continued working on your wedding while building a legal case against your fiancé? That's remarkable self-control." I didn't want him to suspect anything. If he'd known I was investigating, he might have destroyed evidence or transferred more money. Smart. She leaned back in her chair. "I want you to know that you have the firm's full support. We've already drafted a statement for any media inquiries. We're emphasizing your professionalism and dedication. This doesn't reflect poorly on you, Rebecca. If anything, it demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking and attention to detail we value in our senior architects. The vote of confidence steadied me. I'd worried that becoming the center of a viral scandal might damage my professional reputation. Instead, my colleagues treated me like someone who'd survived a battle and come out stronger. That evening, I met with my private investigator, Marcus Chen, at a coffee shop far from my usual neighborhoods. He'd been the one to uncover the affair, to document Connor's movements, to build the foundation of my case. I have something you need to see, he said, sliding his laptop across the table. I've been monitoring Madison's digital activity since the wedding. She's been sloppy. On screen was a series of screenshots from Madison's private Instagram account. Photos of her and Connor together, some dating back 10 months. Captions that referenced my future husband and building our dream life. Comments from friends congratulating her on finding the one. She documented the entire affair. I breathed publicly. Not just that. Marcus clicked through to another folder. I found her business accounts. Madison's boutique firm was hemorrhaging money. She had 3 major clients cancel in the past 6 months due to missed deadlines and subpar work. Her rent was 2 months overdue. She was desperate. The pieces shifted into a new configuration. Connor told her I had family money, that once we were married, he'd have access to it and could support her. Exactly. I found text messages between them discussing his plan to marry you, gain access to your supposed trust fund, and then leave you for Madison. They were going to take the money and start over somewhere else. The betrayal cut deeper with each new revelation. Connor hadn't just cheated. He'd been running a long-term con. I was never his future wife. I was his mark. There's more, Marcus continued quietly. Madison has a history. I went back further in her background. 3 years ago, she dated a wealthy tech executive named David Paulson. They were together for a year. He broke up with her when he found out she'd been stealing from his company, using his credentials to authorize fake vendor payments that went to accounts she controlled. She did this before? Yes, and she got away with it. David settled privately to avoid publicity. Madison signed an NDA and walked away with a significant payout. She learned that she could profit from relationships with successful men if she was careful about it. I sat back, processing this information. Madison wasn't just Connor's mistress. She was a practiced con artist who'd identified me as a target, and Connor as her access point. The wedding day humiliation had been planned. She wanted to publicly stake her claim to Connor while destroying me emotionally, so I'd be too devastated to think clearly about the finances. Can we use this David Paulson information in court? It depends. The NDA makes it complicated, but I'm working an angle. If Madison's theft from him followed a similar pattern to what she did with Connor, it establishes a criminal pattern of behavior. That's not covered by an NDA because it's evidence of ongoing criminal activity. Wednesday's restraining order hearing was brief and decisive. The judge reviewed the evidence: Connor's violent gesture at the wedding, the threatening text messages, Madison's harassment through social media. Both were ordered to stay at least 500 feet from me at all times and to cease all direct and indirect contact. Connor attended the hearing, his lawyer beside him. He looked terrible, haggard, and desperate, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a frame that had lost weight. He tried to catch my eye several times, but I refused to acknowledge him. I'd learned something important about power. Indifference was more devastating than anger. Madison didn't attend. According to Patricia, she'd left the state, supposedly visiting family in California. Her attorney assured the judge she would comply with the restraining order from a distance. She's running, Patricia told me after the hearing. That's an admission of guilt right there. The following week brought my first deposition. Connor's attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Bradley Morrison, tried every tactic to make me appear vindictive, calculating, manipulative. For 6 hours, he questioned my timeline, my motives, my decision to continue with the wedding planning while knowing about the affair. Isn't it true, Miss Ashford, that you intentionally created a public spectacle for the purpose of damaging my client's reputation? No, I created accountability. Your client chose to publicly humiliate me in front of 200 witnesses. I simply ensured there would be consequences for theft and fraud. You hired a private investigator to spy on Connor. You built a case against him while pretending to plan your wedding. That's deceptive behavior. Your client stole $47,000 from our joint accounts. He committed fraud against my father's company. He carried on an affair for 8 months while lying to my face daily. I didn't spy. I protected myself from a criminal. Bradley shifted tactics. You could have simply broken off the engagement privately. Why didn't you? Because Connor controlled the narrative. He'd already been telling people I was mentally unstable, that I had trust issues, that I was the problem in our relationship. If I'd broken up with him quietly, He would have painted me as the villain who couldn't handle his success. Instead, he showed everyone exactly who he was. The deposition continued, but I could see Bradley's frustration mounting. His client had left a paper trail so obvious that no amount of legal maneuvering could obscure it. Every question he asked, I answered calmly with documented facts. Every attempt to portray me as vindictive, I countered with evidence of Connor's crimes. When we finally broke for the day, Patricia looked satisfied. You did extremely well. Connor's attorney has nothing. He's going to push for settlement again, but the offer will be much higher this time. I still don't want to settle. I know, and honestly, I think that's the right call. This case needs to go to trial. Other women need to see that men like Connor face real consequences. That night, I received an email from a stranger named Sarah Mitchell. She'd seen the wedding videos and felt compelled to share her own story. 3 years ago, she'd been engaged to Connor's college roommate, Derek. Derek had pulled a nearly identical scheme, cheating on her throughout their engagement, stealing money from their joint accounts, and finally humiliating her by leaving her at the altar for another woman. I was too ashamed to fight back, Sarah wrote. I just wanted it to go away. I let him keep the money. I didn't press charges, and he got away with it. Watching you stand up to Connor gave me courage I didn't have then. Thank you for showing what accountability looks like. Her email was one of dozens. Women reached out sharing their own stories of financial abuse, of partners who stole and lied and manipulated. Men wrote too, some who'd been victims themselves, others who'd watched their sisters or daughters go through similar betrayals. The wedding disaster had become something larger than my personal revenge. It had opened a conversation about financial abuse, about the ways intimate partners exploit trust, about the importance of documentation and legal protection. My architecture firm started receiving calls from women asking if I'd be willing to speak at events about financial safety and relationships. A domestic violence organization invited me to join their board. Law schools requested permission to use my case as an example in their family law courses. You've become a symbol, Lauren told me one evening over wine, whether you wanted to be or not. I just wanted Connor to face consequences. I didn't ask to be a spokesperson. Maybe not, but look at what you've created. Real change, real awareness. Connor didn't just lose his money and his job, he lost his ability to do this to someone else. She was right. Whatever happened in court, Connor's reputation was destroyed beyond repair. A simple Google search of his name brought up dozens of articles about the wedding scandal. Future employers would find the videos. Future partners would see the evidence. He'd branded himself as a liar and a thief in the most public way possible. And Madison's boutique firm had closed entirely. Her website was down, her social media accounts deleted, her business registration canceled. She'd lost everything she'd schemed to build. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 months ago. Anxious, trusting, willing to ignore red flags because I desperately wanted to believe in the life Connor promised. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, more strategic. The old Rebecca would have been destroyed by the wedding day humiliation. The new Rebecca had turned it into a weapon. The trial date arrived 6 weeks later on a gray November morning. I dressed carefully in a navy suit, professional but not aggressive, my hair pulled back in a simple style. Patricia had coached me extensively on courtroom demeanor, calm, factual, emotionally controlled but not cold. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. News vans lined the street. What should have been a straightforward civil case about fraud and theft had become a media sensation. The trial that was really about whether women could defend themselves against financial abuse without being labeled vindictive. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than I'd expected. Wooden benches, fluorescent lighting, the faint smell of old paperwork. Connor sat at the defense table, his attorney beside him, looking smaller somehow than he had at the wedding. He'd lost more weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. When I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, he turned to look at me, and I saw something I didn't expect. Fear. Judge Marilyn Vasquez called the court to order. She was in her late 50s, known for no-nonsense rulings and intolerance for theatrics. Her reputation made me feel safer, like the facts would matter more than emotional manipulation. Patricia's opening statement was clinical and devastating. She outlined the timeline of Connor's theft, the progression of the affair, the systematic deception that had led to me standing at the altar in ignorance while Connor planned to humiliate me publicly. She displayed the bank statements on a projector, showing each transfer of money from our joint account to Connor's personal account, then the subsequent charges at jewelry stores, luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, all on dates when Connor had told me he was working late. This is not a case about a relationship gone wrong, Patricia told the jury. This is a case about deliberate, calculated theft and fraud. Mr. Fletcher took $47,000 from accounts he shared with Ms. Ashford. He committed fraud against her father's company to the tune of $23,000, and he did all of this while planning to publicly humiliate the woman he claimed to love in front of 200 witnesses, as part of a scheme with his mistress to gain access to money that didn't exist. Connor's attorney, Bradley Morrison, tried to reframe the narrative in his opening statement. What we have here is a woman scorned, someone who felt rejected and used her considerable resources to destroy a man who simply fell out of love with her. Yes, Connor Fletcher made mistakes. Yes, he handled the end of their relationship poorly. But the punishment Ms. Ashford has inflicted far exceeds any harm she suffered. His career is destroyed. His reputation is ruined. His entire life has been dismantled because he was honest about his feelings at the wrong time. The first day of testimony focused on the financial evidence. My father took the stand, explaining how he'd discovered Connor's fraudulent expense reports. He'd submitted invoices for client dinners that never happened, business travel that was actually personal trips with Madison, equipment purchases that were never delivered. My father had documented everything meticulously, cross-referencing Connor's expense claims with actual company records, and finding discrepancy after discrepancy. Under cross-examination, Bradley tried to suggest my father was exaggerating the fraud because he was protective of his daughter. Mr. Ashford, isn't it true that you only began investigating Connor's expenses after the wedding incident? No, I'd noticed irregularities 3 months prior. I'd been building a file, planning to confront Connor privately. When Rebecca told me she was also investigating him, we coordinated our efforts. So you were already biased against him. I was already suspicious of a man who was stealing from my company. The bias came from evidence, not emotion. The second day brought testimony from my private investigator, Marcus Chen. He walked the jury through his surveillance of Connor and Madison, showing photos and videos of them together at hotels, restaurants, Madison's apartment. He explained how he'd documented their movements, cross-referenced their schedules with Connor's lies to me about working late or traveling for business. Bradley attacked the surveillance as invasive and potentially illegal. Marcus calmly explained that all surveillance had been conducted in public spaces or with proper legal authority, that Connor and Madison had no expectation of privacy when entering hotels together or dining at restaurants. You spied on my client for 3 months, Bradley said accusingly. I documented criminal activity, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. On the third day, I took the stand. Patricia led me through my testimony gently, establishing the timeline of my relationship with Connor, the engagement, the wedding planning. She asked about the moment I'd first suspected something was wrong. It was small things at first, I explained. Connor became protective of his phone. He'd take calls in another room. He started going to the gym at odd hours. When I asked questions, he'd turn it around, accuse me of being paranoid or controlling. When did you hire the investigator? When Connor told me he had to work late on my birthday. I went to his office to surprise him with dinner. The security guard told me Connor had left hours earlier. I sat in my car in the parking lot and realized I didn't know where my fiancé actually was or what he was doing. And what did the investigation reveal? That he'd been with Madison, that this wasn't a one-time mistake. It was an ongoing affair, that he was spending our money on her, that he was planning to marry me to access funds he thought I had, then leave me for her once he'd secured what he wanted. Patricia showed the jury Connor's text messages to Madison, messages we'd subpoenaed. Once I get access to her trust fund, we can start fresh. Just need to wait until after the wedding. And later, she has no idea. Thinks we're building a future together. It's almost sad how naive she is. The courtroom was silent as the jury read those messages on the projection screen. Several jurors looked at Connor with open disgust. Bradley's cross-examination was aggressive. Miss Ashford, isn't it true that you continued planning the wedding even after you knew about the affair? Yes. Why would you do that unless you were planning to use the wedding as a trap? I was documenting evidence and consulting with attorneys about the best way to protect myself legally. Connor was still accessing our joint accounts. If I'd broken up with him immediately, he might have emptied them entirely or destroyed documentation of his fraud. So you admit you were setting a trap. I admit I was protecting myself from a thief. Bradley tried another angle. You hired a private investigator. You filed a lawsuit. You had Connor served with papers at the altar in front of 200 people. That's not protection. That's revenge. Connor chose to humiliate me publicly. He planned that moment carefully, coordinating with Madison to maximize the emotional damage. I simply ensured there would be legal accountability for his actions. If he'd wanted to avoid public humiliation, he shouldn't have tried to humiliate me publicly. But you could have handled this privately. You chose to make it a spectacle. Connor made it a spectacle. I just documented it. Bradley grew increasingly frustrated as I refused to be baited into admitting vindictiveness. Every question he asked, I answered with calm reference to Connor's criminal behavior. He'd stolen money. He'd committed fraud. He'd lied consistently for months. Those were facts, not emotions. On the fourth day, Madison was called to testify. She'd returned from California under subpoena, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd walked down the aisle in a white dress. She was thin, pale, her designer clothes replaced with a simple black suit. Patricia's questioning was methodical and brutal. She established that Madison had known Connor was engaged when their affair started. She showed Madison's Instagram posts celebrating her man and their future. She walked through the financial transactions, proving that Madison had received direct transfers from the joint account Connor shared with me. Miss Sterling, did you know this money was stolen? Connor told me it was his money from bonuses, but these transfers came from an account in both his and Rebecca's names. You never questioned why he was transferring money out of a joint account? I trusted him. You trusted him enough to accept $30,000 worth of gifts and cash over 8 months without asking where it came from? Madison's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know he was stealing from her. I thought she knew about us. Connor said they had an open relationship, that Rebecca was fine with him seeing other people. Yet you showed up to their wedding in a white dress and sat in the front row smiling. Does that sound like someone who believed Rebecca was fine with the relationship? Connor said it was a joke, that Rebecca would think it was funny. The lie was so transparent that several jurors shifted in their seats. Madison was caught, trapped by her own social media posts and her participation in the wedding day humiliation. Under cross-examination, Bradley tried to portray Madison as a victim of Connor's manipulations, but Patricia's questioning had been too effective. The jury had seen Madison's posts, her comments about stealing Connor away, her active participation in spending the stolen money. The final witness was Connor himself. Bradley had him take the stand to humanize him, to show remorse, to convince the jury that he'd made mistakes but wasn't a criminal. It backfired spectacularly. Patricia's cross-examination destroyed him. Mr. Fletcher, you stole $47 from accounts you shared with Rebecca. Is that correct? I moved money from one account to another. We weren't married yet. So technically, you withdrew money that didn't belong solely to you and used it to fund an affair. Yes or no? Connor's jaw tightened. Yes. You submitted fraudulent expense reports to Rebecca's father's company, billing for dinners and travel that never occurred. Is that correct? There may have been some discrepancies in my expense reports. Discrepancies totaling $23,000. Yes or no? Yes. You told Madison that Rebecca had a trust fund that you would access after the wedding. Is that correct? I may have exaggerated our financial situation. You lied about non-existent money to manipulate Madison into a relationship while stealing from Rebecca to maintain that lie. Yes or no? It's more complicated than that. Answer the question, Mr. Fletcher. Yes or no? Yes. The word was barely audible. And on the day of your wedding in front of 200 guests, you publicly humiliated Rebecca by announcing you deserved better and having your mistress sit in the front row. Is that correct? I was honest about my feelings. That's not what I asked. Did you deliberately create a public spectacle designed to humiliate Rebecca? Yes or no? Connor looked at his attorney, who could offer no escape. Yes. Patricia let the admission hang in the air for a long moment before continuing. You wanted to humiliate her publicly, but when she defended herself with legal documentation of your crimes, you claimed she was vindictive. Is that correct? She destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life, Mr. Fletcher. Rebecca simply held you accountable. The closing arguments the next day crystallized the two competing narratives. Bradley painted Connor as a flawed man who'd made mistakes, but whose life had been disproportionately destroyed by a vengeful ex-fiancé. Patricia painted him as a thief and a fraud who'd systematically exploited Rebecca's trust for his own financial gain. Members of the jury, Patricia said in her closing, this case is simple. Connor Fletcher stole $47,000. He committed fraud totaling $23,000. These are not relationship problems. These are crimes. The defendant wants you to believe that Rebecca's decision to document his crimes and pursue legal action makes her vindictive. But defending yourself against theft is not revenge. It's justice. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and delivered their verdict, liable on all counts. Full restitution of $70,000 plus $180 in punitive damages for emotional distress and fraud. Connor's face went white. Bradley immediately requested appeal, but Judge Vasquez denied it. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury instructions clear, the verdict sound. As the courtroom emptied, Connor approached our table. Security moved to intercept him, but Patricia waved them back. Connor looked directly at me for the first time since the trial began. Are you happy now? His voice was hoarse. You got your revenge. I met his eyes calmly. I got accountability. There's a difference. My life is ruined. You ruined it yourself the moment you chose to steal and lie. I just made sure there were consequences. He stood there for another moment, seeming to search for words that might undo the damage. Finally, he turned and walked away, his attorney's hand on his shoulder, looking like a man who'd finally understood the true cost of his actions. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I made a brief statement, carefully worded with Patricia's guidance, about the importance of financial literacy in relationships and the right to defend yourself against fraud. I didn't mention revenge or vindication. I talked about accountability and justice. That night, the verdict was national news. Legal experts analyzed the case on cable networks. Social media erupted with reactions, most supporting the jury's decision, some calling me vindictive, many sharing their own stories of financial abuse. I lay in my childhood bedroom, physically and emotionally exhausted, and felt something I hadn't expected: emptiness. The victory was real, the vindication complete. Connor and Madison had been held accountable in the most public way possible, but it didn't erase the betrayal, didn't undo the 3 years I'd spent building a life with someone who saw me as a mark rather than a partner. Justice had been served, but justice didn't heal the wound of knowing the person I'd loved had never really existed. The weeks following the verdict brought an avalanche of consequences for Connor and Madison that exceeded even my strategic planning. The court judgment was only the beginning. Silverstone Financial fired Connor the day after the verdict, citing breach of ethics and fiduciary responsibilities. The termination was public and deliberate, their corporate statement emphasizing zero tolerance for fraud. Without his $140, our dollar salary, and the expensive lifestyle it had funded, Connor's financial situation collapsed within days. His luxury apartment lease was broken, the landlord citing non-payment and damage to the unit. Connor moved in with his parents in their modest suburban home, a humiliating reversal for someone who'd spent years cultivating an image of success. His car, a leased BMW he could no longer afford, was repossessed from his parents' driveway. Neighbors filmed it on their phones, and the video found its way to social media within hours. Patricia called me one morning with an update that brought grim satisfaction. Connor filed for bankruptcy. He's claiming he can't pay the judgment. Can he do that? He can try. But bankruptcy doesn't erase debts incurred through fraud. We're challenging the filing. Even if it goes through, the fraud component means he'll still owe you most of what the court awarded. Madison's situation was even more dire. Her boutique firm had collapsed completely, her reputation so damaged that no client would work with her. The lease on her office space had been terminated, her business accounts frozen due to suspected fraud, her professional network abandoning her en masse. But more significantly, David Paulson, the tech executive she'd stolen from 3 years earlier, had read about the trial and contacted Patricia. The NDA he'd signed prevented him from discussing Madison's theft from his company, but it didn't prevent him from reporting new criminal activity that followed the same pattern. He's willing to testify about her methods, Patricia explained. The pattern of behavior, how she targets successful men, how she manipulates her way into access to financial resources. It establishes Madison as a serial offender, not someone who made a one-time mistake with Connor. The district attorney's office was now building a criminal case against Madison for fraud and conspiracy. If convicted, she was looking at 3 to 5 years in prison. My father's company pursued its own case against Connor for the fraudulent expense reports. The criminal fraud charges were filed separately from my civil case, with prosecutors emphasizing the systematic nature of Connor's theft. His trial date was set for 4 months out. He's going to prison, Patricia said matter-of-factly during one of our meetings. The evidence is overwhelming. The only question is how long. I should have felt victorious. Connor was losing everything: his career, his home, his freedom, his reputation. Madison was facing criminal charges and professional ruin. The justice system had validated every claim I'd made about their behavior. Instead, I felt hollow. The victory was real but unsatisfying in ways I hadn't anticipated. Destroying Connor's life didn't undo the fact that he'd succeeded in wasting 3 years of mine. Watching Madison face consequences didn't erase the memory of her walking down the aisle in that white dress, smiling like she'd won. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Winters, helped me process these conflicting emotions during our weekly sessions. Accountability isn't the same as healing, she explained. You ensured they faced consequences for their actions, which was necessary and important, but consequences for them don't automatically heal the wounds they inflicted on you. So what does heal them? Time, processing, building a life that isn't defined by what they took from you. I threw myself into work with renewed intensity. Catherine Morrison, my boss, gave me lead architect responsibilities on a major civic center project, our firm's largest commission in years. The work was consuming, technically challenging, requiring every bit of my attention and creativity. I welcomed the distraction. My social life slowly rebuilt itself. Lauren and I started a weekly dinner tradition, trying new restaurants and dissecting everything from work stress to dating disasters. My parents invited me over for Sunday dinners, the 3 of us finding a new rhythm after the trauma of the wedding. I joined a recreational volleyball league, something I hadn't played since college, and discovered I'd missed the pure physical release of competition. 6 weeks after the trial, I went on my first date. His name was Daniel Chen, a civil engineer I'd met through the Civic Center project. We'd collaborated on foundation requirements and load-bearing calculations, professional interactions that gradually revealed shared interests and compatible humor. I should probably mention, Daniel said over dinner at a quiet Thai restaurant, I know about your wedding. The whole internet knows about your wedding. I'd been dreading this conversation. Does that bother you? That your ex-fiancé turned out to be a criminal and you held him accountable? No. That you're strategic enough to build a legal case while managing a crisis? Actually, that's impressive. What bothers me is whether you're ready to date again. His directness was refreshing. Honestly, I don't know, but I'm trying to figure it out. Fair enough. How about we take it slow and see what happens? The date didn't lead to romance, but it led to friendship and the realization that I could be vulnerable with someone new without fear. Daniel became part of my expanding social circle. Someone I could grab coffee with or text about work frustrations without romantic pressure. 3 months after the trial, Connor's criminal case for fraud against my father's company went to court. I attended, sitting in the gallery while prosecutors presented the same evidence we'd used in the civil trial. Connor's attorney tried for a plea deal, offering to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for probation. The judge rejected it. Connor had shown no genuine remorse, had attempted to blame Rebecca for his situation, and had violated the terms of his bail by attempting to contact me through intermediaries. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in state prison, the high end of the sentencing guidelines. I watched Connor being led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his head down, his expensive suit replaced with prison clothing. He'd aged years in the months since our wedding, stress and shame carving new lines into his face. Part of me felt satisfaction at seeing justice fully served. Another part just felt sad at the waste of it all. Sad that someone I'd once loved had been capable of such calculated cruelty. Madison's trial came 2 months later. I testified again, this time for the prosecution in a criminal case rather than as a plaintiff in civil court. The trial lasted only 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming, her pattern of behavior across multiple victims impossible to deny. The jury convicted her on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 3 years, noting that her lack of remorse and continued harassment of me after the civil trial demonstrated she posed a continued threat to future victims. As Madison was led from the courtroom, she turned and looked directly at me. Her face was hard, angry, no trace of the polished professional I'd seen at the wedding. She mouthed something I couldn't quite make out, but I understood the intent. Blame, accusation, refusal to accept responsibility. I held her gaze steadily until she was out of sight. She could spend her prison sentence believing she was the victim. The courts and the evidence told a different story. That evening, I met my parents for dinner at their house. My mother had cooked my favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables, comfort food that reminded me of childhood Sundays. We ate quietly for a while before my father spoke. It's over now. Really over. I nodded. Connor's in prison. Madison's in prison. The money's being repaid in installments from the bankruptcy court. The fraud case is closed. Yes, it's over. How do you feel? My mother asked gently. I considered the question carefully. Relieved, vindicated, but also tired. So tired of thinking about them, talking about them, having my life defined by what they did to me. So stop, my father said simply. What? Stop letting them define you. You won. You got justice. Now build something they can't touch. His words settled into my chest, taking root. I'd spent nearly a year focused on accountability, on consequences, on making sure Connor and Madison faced the full weight of their actions. That mission was complete. But I'd been so focused on justice that I'd neglected to build anything beyond it. The Civic Center project became my focus. I poured creativity and energy into designing spaces that would serve the community for generations. The work was meaningful in ways my previous projects hadn't been, something larger than client satisfaction or aesthetic achievement. Catherine noticed the shift in my work. You're designing with more confidence, she observed during a review meeting, less concerned with playing it safe, more willing to take risks. I don't have anything left to prove, I realized aloud. I already survived the worst thing I thought could happen. Everything else is just architecture. 6 months after Connor's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter, prison mail, Connor's name on the return address. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won. The letter was brief, handwritten on lined notebook paper. Rebecca, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just need you to know that I understand now what I did to you. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me or to believe I've changed. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for all of it. The affair, the theft, the humiliation at the wedding. You deserved better than what I gave you, Connor. I read it twice, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda, but it seemed sincere in a way Connor's earlier apologies had never been. Prison had stripped away his ability to maintain his false self, leaving behind someone who'd finally been forced to confront what he'd done. I showed the letter to Dr. Winters during our session. What do you want to do with this? She asked. Nothing. He's apologizing to ease his own guilt, not because I need to hear it. Whether I accept his apology or burn this letter doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change who he is or what he did. That's very self-aware. I'm done giving him power over my emotions. He can feel guilty. He can feel remorseful. That's his journey now, not mine. I filed the letter away in the box of legal documents from the case. One more piece of evidence that accountability had been achieved. Then I went back to living my life. A year after the wedding, my architecture firm hosted an open house for the newly completed Civic Center. The building was beautiful, all glass and natural light, spaces designed to flow and welcome and inspire. I stood in the main atrium watching community members explore their new facility, feeling pride that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. Daniel found me there. He'd moved from professional acquaintance to genuine friend, someone I could trust with the messy parts of my emotional recovery. You did amazing work here, he said, gesturing at the soaring ceiling and the way light played across the walls. We did amazing work. Your foundation design made all of this possible. Fair enough. Team effort. He paused, then added carefully, I know this is a big anniversary, Are you okay? You know what? I actually am. A year ago today, I was standing in a wedding dress, watching my life fall apart. Today, I'm standing in a building I helped create, surrounded by people I care about, doing work that matters. I'm more than okay. I'm actually happy. And I meant it. The happiness was tentative, still rebuilding itself, still fragile in some ways. But it was real. Connor and Madison had tried to destroy me, had worked together to humiliate me and steal from me and break me down. Instead, they'd destroyed themselves while I'd built something new from the ruins. That night, I went home to my new apartment, a one-bedroom in a converted warehouse with exposed brick and industrial windows. I decorated it carefully, creating a space that was entirely mine, no compromises with someone else's taste or needs. I poured a glass of wine and stood by the windows, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "Drinks tomorrow to celebrate your freedom-versary?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. We're celebrating life, not revenge." Because that was the truth I'd finally understood. Justice had been served. Accountability had been achieved. Connor and Madison had lost everything they'd schemed to gain. But the real victory wasn't their destruction. It was my reconstruction. I'd survived their betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, more certain of my own worth. They'd tried to break me at the altar. Instead, they'd broken themselves while I learned exactly how resilient I was. 18 months after the wedding, I received notification that Connor had been released from prison on parole. He'd served less than half his sentence due to good behavior and prison overcrowding. The news came via email from Patricia, who wanted me to know he was back in the area. "The restraining order is still in effect," she reminded me during a phone call. "He can't contact you or come within 500 feet. If he violates it, he goes back to prison immediately." I wasn't worried. Connor had lost everything that mattered to him. His career, his reputation, his freedom, his future. What could he possibly take from me now? Madison's release came 3 months later, also early due to good behavior. Unlike Connor, she didn't return to the city. According to Patricia's sources, she'd moved to a different state, changing her name legally to escape the Google results that had destroyed her professional life. "She's working retail now," Patricia told me. "Minimum wage, no possibility of advancement. Her criminal record makes it almost impossible to get anything better. She tried to start another boutique business under her new name, but someone recognized her and exposed her past. The business closed within weeks. The knowledge of their ongoing struggles should have brought satisfaction. Instead, it brought closure. They were living with the consequences of their actions, as they should. But those consequences were no longer my concern. My life had moved forward in ways I'd never anticipated. The Civic Center project led to more high-profile commissions. Catherine promoted me to senior partner, making me one of the youngest people to achieve that position in the firm's 40-year history. My work was featured in architectural magazines, my designs winning awards and recognition. But more importantly, I'd built a life filled with genuine relationships. Lauren and I traveled together, taking a 2-week trip to Greece where we hiked ancient ruins and ate ourselves sick on fresh seafood. My parents and I had grown closer through the trauma, our Sunday dinners becoming sacred time we all protected. I'd even started dating again, carefully and selectively, learning to trust while maintaining healthy boundaries. Daniel and I had evolved from friends to something more over the months, a relationship that developed slowly and honestly. He knew my full story, had witnessed my recovery, and never tried to rush me past my healing process. When he finally kissed me one evening after a particularly successful project presentation, it felt like beginning something new rather than replacing what had been lost. "I need you to know something," I told him that night. "I'm not looking for someone to rescue me or fix me. I've already done that myself." "Good," he replied. "I'm not looking for someone to save. I'm looking for someone to build something with. Someone who knows their own strength and won't lose themselves in a relationship." It was exactly what I needed to hear. The second anniversary of the wedding passed with barely a ripple. I spent the day working on designs for a women's shelter, pro bono work I'd taken on after multiple organizations reached out following the trial. The shelter would provide not just housing but financial literacy classes, legal resources, and therapy services for women escaping financially abusive relationships. "You've turned your trauma into something productive," Dr. Winters observed during one of our now monthly therapy sessions. "That's remarkable growth." Connor and Madison tried to make me a victim. I refused to stay one. That evening, Lauren organized a small dinner party at my apartment. My parents, Daniel, a few close friends, people who'd supported me through the worst and celebrated with me through the recovery. We didn't mention the anniversary explicitly, but we all knew what we were really celebrating. Survival, resilience, the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Midway through dinner, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. A text message. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing well. See, Connor." Violating the restraining order through text message, unable to resist reaching out even though it could send him back to prison, I showed Daniel the message message. What do you want to do? Forward it to Patricia. Document the violation, but I'm not responding. I typed a message to my attorney instead, attaching the screenshot. Then I blocked the number and returned to dinner. Everything okay? Lauren asked, noticing my distraction. Connor texted, breaking the restraining order. My attorney will handle it. Are you going to press charges? I considered the question. Pressing charges would send Connor back to prison, would provide one more consequence for his continued inability to respect boundaries. But it would also mean more court dates, more time thinking about him, more energy devoted to someone who'd already taken too much from me. No. My attorney will document it, report it to his parole officer. If he contacts me again, then we'll pursue legal action. But I'm not going to let him pull me back into that world unless he forces me to. My father nodded approvingly. That's wisdom, knowing when to fight and when to walk away. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I thought about that choice for the rest of the evening. The old Rebecca would have immediately pursued every legal remedy available, would have wanted Connor punished for the violation. But I'd learned something important during my recovery. Not every battle needed to be fought. Some victories came from refusing to engage. Connor texted twice more over the next month, each message increasingly desperate, apologizing and asking if we could talk. Each time, I forwarded the screenshot to Patricia and blocked the number. His parole officer contacted him after the third violation, warning him that continued contact would result in immediate revocation of parole. The text stopped. Madison reached out differently. She sent a letter to my parents' address, somehow finding it despite my careful privacy protections. The letter was 4 pages of self-justification and blame, claiming she'd been manipulated by Connor, that she'd had no idea about the fraud, that her life was ruined unfairly. Everything I worked for is gone because of you, she wrote. I lost my business, my reputation, my freedom. I served 3 years in prison for loving the wrong man. You got your revenge, but you destroyed an innocent person in the process. I read the letter once, then filed it with the other legal documents from the case. Madison would never accept responsibility for her actions. She would spend the rest of her life believing she was the victim, that I had somehow wronged her by defending myself against her scheme with Connor. That was her burden to carry, not mine. 3 years after the wedding, I stood in a different venue entirely, this time as a guest at Lauren's wedding. She'd met someone wonderful, a marine biologist who made her laugh and supported her career and treated her with genuine respect. Their wedding was intimate and joyful, everything a wedding should be. Watching them exchange vows, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. If Connor hadn't betrayed me, if he hadn't shown his true character at the altar, I might have married him. I might have spent years trapped in a marriage with someone who saw me as a resource rather than a partner. The humiliation he'd inflicted had been devastating, but it had also been a gift of truth. He'd revealed exactly who he was, and I'd been strong enough to make him face the consequences. Daniel squeezed my hand during the ceremony, sensing my emotions. You okay? Better than okay, I whispered back. I'm genuinely happy. At the reception, Lauren pulled me aside. Thank you for being here. I know weddings might be complicated for you after everything. This isn't complicated. This is what weddings should be. 2 people who actually love and respect each other making a commitment. What Connor did wasn't a real wedding. It was a performance of his cruelty. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd married him? If you hadn't found out about Madison? Sometimes. But then I remember that the truth always emerges eventually. If I'd married Connor, I'd have found out about his theft and lies after we were legally bound together. The divorce would have been harder, the financial entanglement worse, the betrayal even more devastating. He actually did me a favor by showing his true self before I was trapped. Later that night, as Daniel and I drove home from the wedding, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago. Anxious, trusting, willing to overlook red flags because I desperately wanted to believe in the happily ever after I'd been promised. That woman had died at the altar when Connor announced he deserved better. In her place was someone I respected, strategic, resilient, unwilling to accept less than she deserved. Someone who understood that love without respect was worthless, that trust had to be earned, that protecting yourself wasn't the same as being vindictive. Connor had tried to break me. Instead, he'd forged me into someone stronger. Madison had tried to humiliate me. Instead, she'd shown me exactly how powerful I was when defending myself. Together, they'd given me an unexpected gift, proof that I could survive the worst betrayal imaginable and emerge not just intact, but improved. They'd lost everything in their scheme to take what they wanted. I'd lost a false future and gained a real one. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked as we pulled up to my apartment. How different my life is now compared to 3 years ago. How much better it is. Because of what you built after everything fell apart. Exactly. We walked into the apartment I'd made my own, no traces of Connor or our life together remaining. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every detail reflected my choices alone. I poured 2 glasses of wine and we sat on the balcony overlooking the city, comfortable in the silence. My phone buzzed one last time that night. A message from Patricia. Connor violated parole again. Different issue. He's going back to prison for the remainder of his original sentence plus additional time. Thought you'd want to know you won't have to worry about contact for at least 2 more years. I read the message twice, then deleted it. Connor's continued inability to follow rules, to respect boundaries, to take responsibility for his actions wasn't surprising. He'd always been that person. I'd just been too invested in the fantasy to see it clearly, but I wasn't that person anymore. I didn't need updates on Connor's life or satisfaction from his continued failures. His story was no longer connected to mine except as the catalyst that had transformed me from someone who could be victimized into someone who refused to stay a victim. Good news? Daniel asked, noticing my expression. Just closure, the final piece clicking into place. I put my phone away and focused on the present. The city lights below, the man beside me who'd proven himself trustworthy, the life I'd built with intention and care. Connor and Madison had tried to write my story as one of humiliation and defeat. Instead, I'd rewritten it as one of justice, resilience, and triumph. They'd lost everything in their attempt to take what wasn't theirs. I'd lost only illusions and gained clarity, strength, and a future they could never touch. The wedding that was supposed to destroy me had instead revealed exactly how unbreakable I was. And that was a victory worth more than any revenge.